Hi, this is Garhi, and I'm gonna talk to you about urban psychology, the psychological and physiological effects of cities on its inhabitants. And we're gonna check out whether the way we build, plan, and design our cities right now is good enough or we can do better. I'm gonna start with the book The Image of the City for Kevin Lynch, which was written back in 1960. And even though this book didn't mention directly the term urban psychology, but it did mention that the way we plan our cities is closely linked to our sense of balance and well-being. Also, the book considered the landscape of the city is the skeleton from which social activities and social life erect from this skeleton. So it divided the image of the city into paths, landmarks, districts, edges, and nodes. And if we take an example, the city of Florence in Italy, we see that it has a very unique landmark, which is, of course, the Cathedral of Florence. In a central area in the city. Around it you can see the paths, and you can see also the edges like the rivers and the mountains. And the landmark is quite iconic because it's also related to history. When it has some historical background, this gives a stronger image for the city and a stronger image for the landmark of the city. And this brings us to the idea of patterns. Patterns is a quite important concept in urban planning. Also, Christopher Alexander did talk about, of course, the pattern language. And cities have actually evolved through patterns. Historically, cities used to follow certain patterns, whether geographical patterns or ideological or different types of patterns. Let's take an example for a coastal city. It will follow the pattern of the coast, and even the activities, the trading activities, the economical activities will follow that, the trading, the fishing, and all that, So if it's, a mountain pattern, it's the same story. So the pattern doesn't have to be geographical pattern, it can be an ideological or religious pattern. This is quite apparent in the historical cities of Europe, where you can, it's pretty much typical. You see, the cathedral in a central place of the city, and around it you can see, the trading or the shops and the other districts. Until now, if you go to historical cities in Europe, you will see the same story. The cathedral and around the cathedral, the streets where you can see, you can do all your shopping and all. So this is an example of ideological patterns that cities used to follow. And then after that, we can say that the theories of urban planning started evolving. Like we had the garden cities, we had the linear cities, we had the industrial cities, and then we had, the concepts from Kevin Lynch and Christopher Alexander. But to a great extent, most of these theories didn't consider what we can call the human factor when designing and planning the cities. It was mostly functional, it was function-oriented, that's what we can say. It was mostly function-oriented. Take, for example, the industrial cities. The industrial cities is fully oriented about, how economical factors, almost not considering the human factor, mostly oriented on how we design the factories, where the labor will stay and how they will commute in an effective way between the factories and the places where they are staying. So to a great extent, the human factor was not considered in that. Relatively, to some extent, the ideas of Kevin Lynch and Christopher Alexander started to take into consideration the human factor and the effects of the way we build our cities on the humans and on the inhabitants. In a report for the World Health Organization back in 2016 that was done on 3,000 cities from 103 countries, they mentioned that for middle and low income cities, 98% of those cities don't meet the air quality requirements of the World Health Organization, which of course leads to lots of physiological issues and illnesses and issues with the respiratory systems, heart attacks, and all these kind of diseases. Also, in a report in The Guardian back in 2011, they mentioned that inhabitants of cities are at a greater risk of negative psychological impacts. For example, they mentioned that the inhabitants of cities are at an increased risk of 21% for facing anxiety disorders, at an increased risk of 39% of facing mood disorders, and they are at a double risk of facing psychological issues like schizophrenia. So the question now, whether these negative psychological and physiological impacts of cities on its inhabitants due to the urban planning, the way we plan or design our cities, or it's due to the habits of its inhabitants and the way they deal with the cities. Of course, there are many factors, and of course they both have a role in that, which we're gonna discuss with a case study of a city. It was one of the most chaotic cities with a very high crime rate and lots of carbon dioxide emissions, and it did transform to one of the greenest cities in the world. So that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could click like, subscribe, and share the video. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thank you so much and see you soon.